Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Damascus Radio. It's time for news for tonight, read by Basim Bagdash. Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, said that he informed the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon that Syria has joined the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and the Use of Chemical Weapons of 1992. In a statement, al-Jafari said that he asked on behalf of the Syrian government, Ki-moon, as the custodian of the convent, to lodge the document of Syria's joining the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or the OPCW, and inform all the UN member states of Syria's decision to join the convention. He pointed out that Syrian Foreign and Expatriates Minister Walid al-Muallim sent a letter to the Director General of the OPCW informing him of Syria's joining the convention. Al-Jafari noted that this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, as Syria had submitted to the Security Council in the year 2003 a draft resolution for making the entire Middle East clear of weapons of mass destruction. But all the Syrian efforts in this regard were thwarted by the refusal of Israel and its protectors. U.S. President Barack Obama should know well that history's judgment will be that the president who seeks to prevent war and the destruction and make peace is stronger than the president who seeks war and destruction. More details are in this following report.
Throughout history, we have seen that the first victims of all the wars that happened in the past were children, women, and innocent people. Obama should not forget that he was the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel laureates are resolutely advocates of peace, not wars and reckless military adventures. What are the real aims of Obama's military adventure? It is to strike the capabilities of the Syrian Arab army in favor of Al-Qaeda and its affiliates in Syria like Jabhat al-Nusra. How can Obama support those who blew up the World Trade Center in New York on September the 11th, 2011? Who is the most beneficiary of this military adventure? Israel is the most beneficiary because extremism serves Zionism and enables Israel to invade the Arab region politically and economically through implementing the notorious New Middle East project, which aims to perpetuate the Israeli occupation of the Arab territories and plunder the Arab resources, especially oil and gas. Instead of thinking of the warlords camping and launching a thoughtless military adventure whose adverse consequences would not be limited, Obama and his ilk have to focus efforts on finding a peaceful solution through convening the intended international conference in Geneva and calling on the so-called opposition to take part in the conference without any conditions. Obama and the warlords in his administration should know well that the Syrian government has agreed on participating in Geneva's second conference without any preconditions, whereas no unified attitude was released by the so-called opposition regarding the conference. The only preoccupation for this opposition is to seek for more weapons, tools of destruction, and call for foreign military intervention in their own country. The U.S. and European peoples had firmly stood against the aggression. The British House of Commons and the French Senate were a good example to that. New polls in the United States of the American revealed that the majority of the Americans are opposing any military act against Syria. The New York Times said that the new polls reveals a great change in the American public opinion on the U.S. role in the world and the exhaustion it has suffered due to the previous U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The American people seem to call on Obama, stop your intervention in other countries and pay more attention to your people's internal affairs and social welfare.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stressed that military scenarios in Syria should be avoided, adding that Russia's starting point in work with the United States is Damascus's decision to join the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. In a joint press conference with his U.S. counterpart John Kerry, Lavrov noted that he stressed the issue of avoiding military scenarios regarding Syria in his meeting with Kerry, as well as that of the Syrians determining their destiny by themselves. He stressed that there cannot be talk now about using force or any punishment against Syria, noting that any breach of the terms agreed upon concerning the Syrian chemical weapons will be discussed by the Security Council, which is to adopt suitable decisions. Lavrov considered that solving the issue of chemical weapons in Syria is a step towards making the Middle East region free of weapons of mass destruction. He also highlighted that what was agreed upon today between Russia and the U.S. is considered a major step towards finding the comprehensive solution to the crisis in Syria. Lavrov said there are countries who have worked hard to fund the war in Syria, while there are other countries that are striving to reach a peaceful solution to ward off destruction and bloodshed. On his part, the U.S. Secretary of State said all parties know that there is no military solution to the crisis in Syria, affirming that the solution should be political. Kerry stressed readiness to give a chance to the ongoing diplomatic efforts regarding the chemical weapons in Syria. He made clear what he and Lavrov are doing in Geneva is implementing the agreement reached between the U.S. President and Russian President Vladimir Putin at St. Petersburg summit. Chairman of the Russian State Duma Foreign Affairs Committee, Alexei Pushkov, stressed that the U.S. cannot make single-handed global political decisions anymore. Russia Today website quoted Pushkov as saying on Twitter that the BRICS countries approved Russia's stance on Syria and later at the Shanghai Organization Cooperation or the SCO summit held recently in Kyrgyzstan, which is a lesson to the U.S. President Barack Obama. A leaked classified CIA's document has disclosed that Al-Qaeda-linked armed groups fighting in Syria possessed and manufactured sarin gas to launch chemical attacks against the Syrian civilians, another evidence of the involvement of these groups in the chemical attack perpetrated on the 21st of August in Ghouta area in Damascus countryside to hold the Syrian government responsible for and to call for an American military intervention. The document further asserted that 12 of Jabhat al-Nusra were detained with bottles of sarin gas in their possession south of Turkey along the Syrian-Turkish border lines earlier of this year, adding that these poisonous bottles were smuggled from Iraq to Syria later on. The document further asserted that the American army carried out many investigations and that news coming from Iraqi tribes showed more than 50 traces that proved that Al-Qaeda in Iraq developed sarin gas to be smuggled into Syria and that the preliminary results of the investigation carried out by the UN on the terrorist chemical attack on Khan al-Asad district in Aleppo pointed strongly that the armed groups were behind it. Kofi Annan, the former United Nations envoy to Syria, has voiced his hope that the Russian and U.S. foreign ministers Sergei Lavrov and John Kerry, respectively, reach an agreement on a full political settlement of the crisis in Syria and not just about the Syrian chemical weapons. In a press statement yesterday in Geneva, Annan said, "I hope that the talks of Lavrov and Kerry lead to a solution not only to the chemical weapons, but also to a large number of issues concerning a political settlement, as this will reflect positively on the humanitarian situation in Syria." Assistant Regional Secretary of the Socialist Arab Al-Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party, Hilal, Governor of Damascus countryside, Hussein Makhlouf, and Secretary of Al-Ba'ath Arab Socialist Party branch in Damascus countryside, Mohammed Bkhait, toured the city of Ma'loula after the army cleared the area of terrorists. The visitors were briefed by the army officers on the military operations which inflicted heavy losses upon the armed terrorist groups before rescuing 2 civilians from the area who were abducted by the terrorists for a week. Hilal stressed that the Syrian people, in cooperation with the army, were able to overcome the plot and confront the armed terrorist groups. On his part, Makhlouf said that the governorate has started to repair the infrastructure in the city, adding that the government will provide loans to the locals to enable them rebuild their damaged houses. In turn, Preit said that the unity among the Syrian people will remain strong despite all the plots and schemes that aim at undermining it, adding that the battle of Ma'lula is the battle of the people and the army. And now over to the final item, ladies and gentlemen, that says, within the frame of the collusion of Al Saud authorities with the Israeli enemy and the dubious role the Saudis are playing against Syria and the Syrian people, the Jerusalem newspaper Al Manar revealed an Israeli secret meeting held in the Italian capital, Rome, organized by the Saudis and 3 leaders of the Doha coalition, in addition to political and high-ranking Israeli and Saudi security officials. Wide-viewing sources said that the message Saudi Arabia is trying to convey through this meeting is that the destiny of more than 70% of the armed terrorist groups in Syria depends on the financial and military support offered by Al Saud authorities. This change happened in the last year after the Saudi intelligence had caught the threads of the terrorist groups, which worked according to instructions and plans given from the operation rooms supervised by the Saudi authorities in nearby arenas and run by Salman bin Sultan, who has been recently assigned as Deputy Saudi Defense Minister. With regards to the help offered by Israel to the armed terrorist groups in Syria in the form of supplying arms, medically treating the terrorists in Israeli hospitals, and intelligence support in all its different forms, the Israeli delegate has informed the Saudi delegate that Israel will continue its support. Things, however, will not run in the same course on which the crisis of the chemical weapons in Damascus countryside has been designed, and all the sides involved in the Syrian file have to realize this information and the truth that the Russian initiative has overcome all the possible excuses which the US President Barack Obama depended on for justifying any military act against Syria. With that last item, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude our news for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Endless hassles and allegations on the chemical weapons in Syria meet no destination. In other words, that reckless campaign against Syria has no one single aim: to make Syria yield before the Western and Israeli pressures and some Arab ones. Even the warlords against Syria, the French and American officials, cast statements which cannot be credible to any reason. They have fabricated lies, and they even pushed others to fabricate ones. The subtle chants of delusion and misleading, which broadcast in Arabic, are deducted to support the Wahhabi terrorist war against Syria. They speak of a punishment to the Syrian government, as if they were the legitimate judge. However, Syria on its part has not declared it possesses chemical weapons. All that the Syrian government said was that Syria is ready to admit the Russian initiative, which aims at putting the Syrian chemical weapons under an international supervision. As for the Americans, they promote a scheme that Syria possesses 500 tons of chemical weapons, while the French claim that Syria possesses 1,000 tons of chemical weapons. The Western allegations, along with the Gulf and Turkish affiliated sites, indicated that there is a different type of war against Syria, namely after the Wahhabi Takfiri and terrorist war had failed for 2 years and a half. Nevertheless, sophisticated weapons funds, expertise, and intelligence information has been offered to those terrorists. Therefore, this is a solid proof that the Wahhabi terrorist war against Syria has met a routine defeat as a result of of the Syrian people resistance, in addition to the Syrian Arab army that chased the terrorist groups inside their dens. At any rate, Syria now is more cautious than ever. It takes into consideration all the possibilities of an aggression, making sure that the inevitable victory is achieved.
That was news and views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The papers published in Damascus today highlighted the following headlines and news items. State leaders of the Shanghai Organization call for respecting the Syrian sovereignty and statehood. They all rejected intervention in Syria's internal affairs without authorization from the UN Security Council. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov carry on the discussions for the third day running on Syria. Russian President Vladimir Putin renews his stand, saying that Syria is the eye-catcher of any interest. Putin also rejects any military intervention against Syria. The Syrian armed forces apply a tight grip over Jabal al-Arba'in mountain in the countryside of Idlib and over several areas in the mountains of Az-Zabadani. The army units also eliminate tens of terrorists who belong to al-Nusra Front, including Saudis, Jordanians, and Libyans. They also destroyed cars loaded with weapons in the countryside of Damascus, Latakia, Aleppo, Hamza, Daraa, and Deir ez-Zor. Iran and China support the Russian initiative, and they confirm their readiness to cooperate for solving the Syrian crisis. The front page editorial in a Thora Daily says that the Syrian response to the Russian initiative was not treaty. It affirms that Syria does not seek to broaden the crisis or to originate a regional or international crisis. Those who bear indignation, who are already Syria's enemies, are seeking the foreign intervention in order to break the axis of resistance. Regrettably, the new enemies have been or have never been doubted by Syria, but the crisis has exposed them. The message directed by the Syria to the whole world offer a doubtless proof that the Syrian government is willing to end the Syrian crisis. It seeks to cessation of violence on terrorism and shedding the Syrian blood. Further, Syria is seeking to combat terrorism along with all its forms, the paper concludes.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
Radio Damascus presents A Call for Justice. In 1988, particularly in August that year, Osama bin Laden, with another person called Ayman al-Zawahiri, an Egyptian aged 62, together with 4 others, established Al-Qaeda organization. This was declared in a meeting in Peshawar, the largest city northwest of Pakistan, near the Afghani borders. The Soviet troops had already started their withdrawal from Afghanistan, which witnessed the influx of a large number of armed men from various parts of the world to support what is called the Afghani Mujahideens, which nourished the idea of expanding jihad on the international arena in the mind of the organization's founder. The same scenario seems to repeat itself. The Western troops who came to Afghanistan to look for bin Laden have started to withdraw from Afghanistan after realizing their objective in killing him in May in 2011. Ayman al-Zawahiri took over the leadership of the organization. Though lacking bin Laden's charisma, he was more versed militarily than the latter. Many believe al-Zawahiri to be hidden in the borders area with Afghanistan, which has been a safe haven for Islamist hardliners since 1980. Rahimullah Yusuf Zai, a specialist in Islamic movements in northern Pakistan, says plans in general are not set by al-Zawahiri, adding that Pakistan or Afghanistan are no more the center of weight for al-Qaeda as a striking force on the ground in terms of efficacy and power, as most of the organization's members left to the Middle East and North Africa. More important, Yusuf Zai adds, most of al-Qaeda armed men do not think at all of returning to Pakistan or Afghanistan. Imtiaz Gul, director of the Strategic Studies Center in Islamabad, says al-Qaeda leadership has actually moved to Yemen and Syria and perhaps to Somalia. He believes al-Qaeda no more needs a leader like bin Laden, as the movement possesses enough funds, ammunition, and ideology to enable it to survive and continue forward, he points out. Those groups have found in the so-called Arab Spring countries a fertile movement. Thus, they spread in Libya, Syria, Egypt, Yemen, and West Africa, supported by the state of chaos in those countries, Imtiaz Gul adds. David Gartenstein Ross, the analyst at the Defense of Democracy establishment, says it is not necessary that Pakistan or Afghanistan be a center for al-Qaeda, and that it is quite normal that they spread in various parts of the Middle East, particularly in the direction of Yemen or Syria. That was a call for justice.
You're listening to Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Before we sign off with the national anthem, here is a final look at the news summary. Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, says that he informed UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon that Syria has joined the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling, and Use of Chemical Weapons of 1992. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stresses that military scenarios in Syria should be avoided. Chairman of the Russian State Duma Foreign Affairs Committee, Alexei Pushkov, stresses that the U.S. cannot make single-handed global political decisions anymore. A leaked classified CIA's document discloses that Al-Qaeda-linked armed groups fighting in Syria possessed and manufactured sarin gas to launch chemical attacks against the Syrian civilians.